we don't know when the next election will be, but election promises are heating up. And hey, so is the planet, which is why the opposition's new climate announcement is causing major waves.
Exciting news, voters. The upcoming election will be fought with energy. Sorry, not with energy, on energy. Peter Dutton has dropped a new climate bombshell, announcing his party will head to the polls with a plan to abandon Australia's 2030 emissions targets.
The 2030 target's not going to be met. It's not going to happen. If you look at the actual emissions under Labor, they have not declined.
But this is much bigger than a domestic policy debate. This would be a breakup on a global scale.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris.
Except we won't, because ditching the 2030 targets means pulling out of the Paris Agreement, the most significant climate change treaty of all time.
It's accepted.
In December 2015, almost every country in the world signed on to a legally binding agreement to keep the global surface temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. To do so meant almost halving emissions by 2030, something Australia has legislated. But the coalition claims that at current rates, the only way Australia can meet the target is by collapsing industry.
If Labor is going to achieve its 2030 targets, which industry is it going to attack? Is it manufacturing? Is it agriculture? Is it resources?
If you're out of the Paris Accord, you're with Libya, Yemen and Iran.
So the government's projections show that Australia is broadly on track to meet our 2030 target, which is great news because we actually need to be slashing even further and faster this decade.
The coalition plan is net zero by 2050, using nuclear power to get there and relying on gas to support the grid until the reactors are built, which the CSIRO says won't happen before 2040, at a cost of up to $12 billion per reactor.
Climate change is caused by the concentration of that climate pollution in our atmosphere, which means that every year we wait and every year we delay to slash climate pollution from fossil fuels, we're making the problem worse.
Even Tony Abbott didn't pull out of a global agreement on climate change, and he thinks it's crap.
The opposition insists that
We are absolutely committed to the Paris Agreement.
but if the 2030 targets are dropped, are they actually committed or really just walking away?
David Speers is host of Insiders on Sunday morning and guest of the project on a Sunday night. David, we just heard David Coleman telling you that the coalition is committed to the Paris Agreement and at the same time they're bailing on it. How does that work?
Yeah, well, they want to say that they're committed to the Paris Agreement. They want to be in the Paris Agreement. But let me just read you one line from the Paris Agreement. I promise I won't bore you with the whole thing. This is from the overview section, right? So the cheat sheet, if you like. And it's pretty straightforward. Countries need to be increasing their ambitions. No backsliding. What does that mean? It means you're meant to, every 5 years, increase your level of climate ambition, not water it down, not drop a target. And look, you know, while the coalition might have some tension within its own ranks on this, I think the reason why David Coleman and other moderates in the Liberals are saying, yeah, we're still committed to Paris, they get it. Voters, they might not know all the detail of the Paris Agreement, but they get that we need a global agreement to tackle climate change. It's probably a good idea if we're a part of it. So that's why they want to say they still support the Paris Agreement, even if what they're talking about now on that 2030 target might put that at risk.
David, the coalition says cutting emissions by 2030 will hurt manufacturing and even agriculture. Is that true?
Look, it's silly to pretend there aren't bumps along the way and costs and pain for some parts of the economy. And don't forget, both sides of politics support that end goal of net zero by 2050. This is where the world is moving. And along the way, there will be other sectors that do quite well out of the transition. Critical minerals, hydrogen. There are parts of the economy that will benefit.
Talk us through the politics of this, David. I mean, could this be an election-winning strategy to get out of Paris?
Look, the politics of this, it's the Nationals in particular that are driving the coalition and the Liberals to talk about dropping the 2030 target or weakening the target. They want to go a lot slower on this journey to net zero. But while that might be popular for the Nationals, there are Liberals who will suffer because of this. Don't forget, the Liberals lost 6 seats at the last election to Teal MPs. They lost 1 to the Greens. This was about climate change, and that remains a big concern in those seats, but also other urban seats as well. So, talking about leaving the Paris Agreement or putting that at risk is going to hurt them electorally in the seats they need to win government again.
David Speers is making promises about 2050 just a way of avoiding accountability. Like, hypothetically, if I was to borrow $50 off Rachel but say, oh, look, I'll pay it back in 26 years, I mean, she's not going to see that money, yeah?
Look, I think it is important to have that long-term goal, right? To let business know in particular and the rest of the world this is where we're heading. What's pretty important, though, is something they can be accountable for in our lifetimes, in the time that they're going to be in Parliament as well. And that's why 2030, a 2035 target and so on, these interim targets are really important because we can see whether they're actually delivering on their promises. It also tells us how much carbon is being removed from the atmosphere or avoided being pumped into the atmosphere. Leaving it all to the end means billions more tonnes could be pumped into the atmosphere. So, yeah, it really matters to have those shorter-term targets.
David, I hope you're doing your bit for the country and not putting your heater on down there in freezing cold Canberra. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.